What kind of questions are asked in UPSC prelims as far as agriculture is concerned? If you basically categorize them into two different categories, you have the input side and the output side. So, on the input side, a lot of questions can be asked on the land management techniques, how seeds and the legislations associated with seeds are there, and what kind of technologies are evolving in this, what kind of pesticides are used, because a lot of talk is going on about the sustainable agricultural practices. What are the government extension services, that is the support services given to the farmers, and what are the various irrigation techniques, and what are the various facilities available for irrigation across different agroeconomic zones. So these are the questions possible. Now when we're talking about output side, we can talk about the various harvesting techniques, storage infrastructure that is there in our country, and finally about the most important thing, that is marketing, which determines the price. So this is the possibility of various questions from the topic of agriculture, and in this video we'll be just talking about a few aspects of each of these possible areas where we can expect questions in this year's examination. Before proceeding further, let me cover the legislative power or the polity angle of this agricultural issue. So this is based on previous year questions and the current affairs. So in 1995 there was a question on agricultural income, whether it is a part of the central list or the state list. You have to remember that as far as agriculture income is concerned, what does Article 269 say? Every other income except agricultural income is considered as part of the taxation powers which the center has. Entry 47 of the state list is talking about the power of the states to tax agricultural income. Also remember that everything that is related to the issue of agriculture is a part of the entry 14 of the state list. Now, in this context, how did the center create the farm laws that came into force and stayed for 221 days till 12th January 2021, where the Supreme Court stayed, and afterwards, of course, the government has withdrawn the three farm laws which were very controversial. That is based on the entry 33 of the concurrent list. As per this entry in the constitution, the entire supply chain of let's say production or distribution supply of any industry including agriculture can be controlled by the center. So in order to bypass this, there were certain states which wanted to pass laws against the implementation of those three farm bills which were introduced, but again parliament can override them by passing another law which mandates the implementation of this. That is the whole point of concurrent laws and giving center more weightage. Anyway, this is the legislative angle of agricultural issues that can be important for solving prelims questions. Questions on seed sector can either be on the legislative part, that is the policy and the law regulating this, or the new technologies which will improve the efficiency of the seeds. If we have to talk about the legislative part, there is a national seed policy in 2002 which talks about the regulation of imports. Why? To protect the biodiversity of the local population. Secondly, there is also one more provision which says that whatever may be the imports, one sample should be submitted to the National Bureau of Plant Genetic Resources under the Ministry of Agriculture. Also remember that this is one of the premier organization under the Indian Council for Agricultural Research. A couple of other important facts include that the largest seed vault in the world is located in Norway at a place called Svalbard, and when it comes to India, it is located at a high altitude region Ladakh at Changla. The next thing that we have to know is about seed classes. That is basically the classification of seeds depending on what they constitute. Now, to begin with, we have what we know as a nuclear seed. This is nothing but a 100% genetically purest form of the seed. This is actually produced by the inventor. Usually it is the state agricultural universities, but also you can have private players or sometimes even individual scientists who can come up with this seed stock. So they will get a certificate saying that this is a nuclear seed. Now, after this, when this is used, the progeny of the nuclear seed multiplied in a large area. That is called a breeder seed. So basically, this is nothing but a large scale production of the specimen, the original copy. Now, this will give rise to what we know as the foundation seeds. These seeds will now be sold in the market. After this, there are something called registered seeds, nothing but the progeny of the foundation seeds that is so handled. Sometimes to maintain the genetic identity and purity, companies will try to ensure certain steps are taken. So those practices should be followed in creating these registered seeds, and they're called registered seeds because after this foundation seeds are replicated, they will have to undergo certification, because maybe sometimes there can be some changes or the purity of the seed can be reduced. So they will be registered after certain checks are done in the lab. After this, you get certified seeds. In order to ensure that seed creators are benefited monetarily, it is usually done in such a way that after the breeder seed generation, maximum of 3 generation is only allowed. After that, it is not allowed. Again, we have to buy the breeder seeds and then go through the entire cycle. So recently there was a bill to revamp the 1968 version of the Seed Act. Now this 2019-2020 Act has not been passed, so I'm not going into the details. If you do have time, you can check it out. When it comes to the intellectual property rights over seeds, there are 3 different international conventions which govern the Indian domestic laws. At the outset, let us make it very clear that there is no patent for seed varieties in our country. Now, how will the creators of seeds be incentivized in this situation? And what are the international treaties in this regard? So, we have the international treaty which talks about the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. This one. It will talk about the rights of farmers, and then we have the WTO TRIPS, which talks about incentivizing the creators of new inventions. And then you also have the UPOV, that is the International Union for the Protection of New Varieties Convention. They also talk about incentivizing the new creators of seed varieties. Now, how will we delicately balance all these needs is the central point that we had in the year 2001. So, in order to create this delicate balance, we created this law called the Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmer Rights, PPVFR 2001. So, this law basically categorizes the stakeholders into 3 different varieties: the breeders, researchers, and the farmers. So, what are the rights of breeders? Breeders means seed producers. What are the rights of researchers? And what are the rights of farmers? This law is important in the recent PepsiCo case, where PepsiCo sued Gujarati farmers for using a potato variety called FC5. This potato variety had low moisture content in them, and that is why the farmers were producing this, because they were getting good prices. Now, PepsiCo sued the Gujarati farmers, saying that they have a registration under this particular act and they were entitled to get certain breeder rights. They said they had PVP, that is Plant Variety Protection Certificate, which was granted by the PPV and FR authority. So there was an authority which was established under this particular act. That authority gave PepsiCo this certificate. That is why they sued the farmer. But at the same time, there is an inconsistency. Within the same law, it is said that farmers can use everything, including the seed, once they are produced from their own crops. So this potato crop was actually produced by first buying a breeder seed from the original company and then reusing it. So farmers were definitely having these rights because they were using the same seed variety that they previously paid for, and the seed that they got now is from the next generation. Also, within the ambit of this law, a farmer is entitled to registration of a seed variety that he created. They can also use the same variety, like in this case FC5. And let's say, for example, they bought a good variety seed which claimed good yield, and the seed did not perform as per the expectation. For non-performance also, they can sue the company. They are eligible to get certain compensation. That is also given under this law. After this, they can directly use and even sometimes sell the produce. as long as it is not a branded variety. So keeping all these points into consideration, the PepsiCo's claim was rejected, and after a lot of pressure from civil society, Indian government through this authority decided that they remove this PVP certificate that Pepsi got, because we saw the original premise, right? There is no patent for seeds. They cannot claim this sort of lawsuits in Indian courts. That is why this news becomes very important. When we talk about seed technologies, we are basically talking about altering the genetics of the plant. So genes express themselves. Because of the genes only, certain characteristics are exhibited. Now if we modify them, they give rise to GMOs. Now this can be of two varieties. They can either be transgenic or genetic engineering. Now sometimes crops have desirable features or they lack desirable features. Depending on whether they are muting that gene or adding that gene, they behave in different ways. Either you mute a gene or add a gene, a novel feature is introduced to the existing gene. When such a procedure is done, it is called a transgenic crop, which is nothing but a variety of the GMO. But when you take the example of genetic engineering, a new variety is created or engineered. Now here when I say engineered, let's say there are certain desirable characteristics in a crop 1 and there are certain desirable characteristics in a crop 2. When you add the desirable characteristics of the two crops and create a third new seed, that is called genetic engineering, and all of this come under the ambit of GMO. Please remember that this might be used interchangeably, but this is the exact meaning. Now the only crop that was genetically modified in our country for commercial cultivation, which received the approval of GESC and also got the government's approval for commercial cultivation. So this is the BT cotton. Actually the BT here stands for the strain that was extracted from the bacteria called the Bacillus thuringiensis. So what happens is these bacteria kind of produces toxins. So these toxins are very harmful for bollworms. So last year there was a question, right? Where do we hear the term bollworm? In what context? So it's nothing but the BT cotton, which is a genetically modified crop. So the company that is actually producing this is Monsanto. However, you have to remember another version called the pink bollworm. This is actually now believed to be resistant to even BT cotton. So we have to develop a new variety for this, and it is becoming an invasive species in most of the world's cotton growing regions. Another crop that was asked in the previous year questions was the DMH11 of mustard. But here it is not about resistance to any disease, but it is about faster efficiency in reproduction. Just remember that. No need to delve into the details. And who produced this? Delhi University. After seeds, the second input that we have to talk about from Prelims perspective is the fertilizers. So after the green revolution, for food security sake, we know that we started producing more and more amount of crops through high yield varieties of seeds. Basically this encouraged monocropping, and monocropping usually requires high amount of inputs. So usually in India the soils require these fertilizers, nitrogenous, phosphorus and potassium fertilizers in the ratio of 4:2:1. So to promote sustainable agriculture, in 1970s government introduced a scheme called the retention pricing scheme. Basically 3 different nutrients are supplied through urea, DAP and MOP. Just remember these names, don't get into the details. Now as per this retention pricing scheme, whatever may be the cost of production, over that a 12% interest was given by the government, or 12% return was given by the government. So obviously companies would inflate the cost, and this would keep on increasing the prices for the government as well. So this was not beneficial, and there was no incentive for the companies to reduce their costs. What happened after this is they removed the blanket subsidy or the 12% return ensured by the previous scheme, and they separated. Different schemes are there now for urea and the other two fertilizers. So now let us see how urea subsidy works. For production of urea, you require natural gas, and government will actually supply this natural gas. So The producers of this urea are categorized upon the efficiency with which they use this natural gas, and the cost of production is therefore determined. And they will set a MRP at which urea must be sold to the farmers. So there is some amount. Now, whatever is the difference between this cost of production and MRP, that is given as a subsidy by the government. Therefore, it's quite evident that this is heavily regulated by the government. In 2015, government made it mandatory for all the domestic urea which is produced in the country to have a neem coating. This has two benefits. One, it avoids leaching of urea into groundwater, and two, it is not possible for neem coated urea to be used in any other sector. So it will be used in agricultural sector only. So smuggling can be avoided. This is the twofold benefit of neem coated urea. So this is all about urea. And as far as these two fertilizers are concerned, they are regulated by nutrient based subsidy. Now, what do you mean by this nutrient based subsidy? So, let's say, for example, in this entire chemical bag, only 10% of phosphorus or potassium is there. So, the government will pay subsidy for only this 10% and not for the other 90% of the constituents. So, nutrient based subsidy means literally that the government would be paying a fixed amount for that particular percentage of the chemical or the nutrient present in that fertilizer. So here it is very clear that MRP is not fixed by the government, and the competition is out of the fact that companies should reduce their cost of production and be very competitive to earn profits. So the government involvement in this DAP and MOP fertilizers is kind of limited. It just pays the producers a fixed amount, or even importers will get a fixed amount. So this roughly is around 35% of the cost of production according to certain estimates. Also remember that companies are expected to print this MRP along with the subsidy that they get on the bag, and if you increase your sale price above MRP, it is punishable under the Essential Commodities Act. So don't get confused. Only if you sell it above MRP, then you are punishable under Essential Commodities Act. Another small trivial information is IFCO, which is nothing but a completely Indian cooperatives owned biggest cooperative society. They introduced nano urea liquid, another important development with respect to fertilizers. So the purpose here is to ensure that it replaces the conventional urea and curtail the requirement by almost 50%. This is the latest development. Hence, it is very important. Even this usage of nano urea liquid has increased the yield by 8% apparently. So this is very important development. Just keep a tab on this latest developments over the next few years also if you are preparing for future examinations. In the context of sustainable development of agriculture, we talk about biofertilizers as well. Now when I say biofertilizers, it is not about organic manure or something. It is not manure, please remember. We here talk about those living organisms which can substitute the fertilizers that we are adding. Now what do I mean? Basically, when we talk about nutrients in an ecosystem, they are obtained through biogeochemical cycles, if you recall it from your environment syllabus. Now different elements like nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, they are obtained because of this biogeochemical cycles. Now they are already present in environment. Now if the plant has to use it up, either they should be mobilized together in the format that it is capable of being taken up by the plant, or directly add it. So making it available is what normal fertilizers do, but if you can actually mobilize it through certain life forms like microbes, that is called the process of using biofertilizers. Now biofertilizers here means usage of these microorganisms, not any organic material. It is not about adding manures and compost, etc. So microorganisms are packaged in a certain format which is useful for the plants. Now bacteria, fungus, algae can be used as biofertilizers. Now here is an interesting question. Can virus be considered a biofertilizer as well? No, obviously not. Why? Because virus is as such not a living form outside a host cell. It always requires a host cell, and rarely viruses help any of the hosts that we find in nature. Therefore, most of the times viruses are harmful, and when we talk about biotic interaction, this is nothing but a negative or harmful interaction for the host. Now, as far as bacteria is concerned, we have bacteria like rhizobium. So this bacteria helps us in fixing the nitrogen fixation. You know that nitrogen as such, even though it is the most abundantly available material in the atmosphere, like around 78% of atmosphere is filled with nitrogen, but it is inert. So in order to absorb this nitrogen through the various processes involved, rhizobium bacteria will help. So bacteria will help in nitrogen fixation, and also sometimes there are certain bacteria which help in phosphorus utility also. But they break down the phosphorus and help the plants in taking it up. And you have certain fungus like mycorrhiza. So they also help in taking up phosphates. And you have certain algae like the blue-green algae or azolla, which help again in nitrogen. Usually you find this in rice fields, and they are also called sometimes methanogens, because rice fields emit a lot of methane, and at the same time they are also helpful in nitrogen fixation. So as far as the commercial exploitation of K, that is potassium, is concerned, we are yet to find out fertilizers that are commercially viable. So in monocropping we add different fertilizers like urea, right? So here we add for each element different microorganisms to the soil, and they help in mobilizing the nutrients from the soil. But if as such soil does not have any of these organic matter, then it is a different thing. We have to support it with organic manure, etc., etc. But biofertilizers generally mean efficiency, increased efficiency of using the available nutrients. So please remember this extremely important topic. At the beginning of the lecture, we have categorized agriculture as input and output side, and we have seen the important developments with respect to seeds and also fertilizers. So on the output side, the marketing is a very important theme. Like we have questions from MSP, what is the role of FCI, how are the costs calculated, what are the schemes that are announced in the Atmanirbhar package for agricultural infrastructure upgrades. All this will constitute the other part. I mean, if you find it useful and if you want the second part, do let me know. You can directly message me over Telegram, or if you find this useful, you can post it in the comment section here itself. That's it for now. Thank you.